Today, I woke up and was like, hey, I want to dedicate the next 7 days of my life to making a full comprehensive guide to Dr. Martin Brenner and Hawkins Lab. Mostly because Spoilers. Mostly because Brenner is now the opposite of not being dead. So it seems like as good of a time as any to analyze the heck out of his character. Also, I really want to talk about the history of Hawkins Lab. I never get to talk about Hawkins Lab. And before we begin, I think it is absolutely crucial for you guys to know that apparently Dr. Martin Brenner was originally supposed to have the appearance of a lumberjack. Brenner would have had a beard, a flannel shirt, jeans, boots, etc. You know, clothing that makes up a lumberjack. In a Footwear News interview with Matthew Modine, who plays Brenner, he explains how he stepped in and changed Brenner's appearance, claiming, "I told them that's not my guy. I'm going to be so clean shaven that the audience is going to smell my aftershave. I'm gonna wear a suit like Cary Grant in North by Northwest, white hair like Robert Shaw in the Battle of the Bulge, and I wanted to wear cap-toe shoes like John Kennedy. I thought it would be much more compelling. He's a doctor." I'm glad that they listened to him and made those changes because it made more sense, but I mean, come on, it would have been pretty dope to see a mad scientist lumberjack. So how far back can we go when it comes to the history of Dr. Brenner? Well, that is just a fantastic question myself. Brenner was helping run trials that were part of a covert CIA operation codenamed MK Ultra, a project centered around mind control experiments using drugs. The real-life project of MK Ultra lasted from the years 1953 through 1973, so it's safe to assume that Brenner was part of the MK Ultra experiments from the beginning, meaning 1953 is as far back as we can go when it comes to analyzing Brenner's mysterious history, because the show hasn't given us any more than that. All we know is that through his research, Brenner worked his way up to senior research scientist and director of Hawkins National Laboratory, a research facility that's commonly disguised as the U.S. Department of Energy, located in the calm and pleasant town of Hawkins, Indiana, a nice, quiet place where nothing ever happens. During and after MK Ultra and other experiments, Brenner was acquiring kids who developed psychic abilities. It's implied that these kids were given these superhero-like abilities from these government-run experiments. Dr. Brenner took in his first victim, abducted his first child, acquired his first test subject in the year 1959. This subject being Henry Creel, who in 1959 was renamed to Number 1. Henry used his abilities to torment and kill his mother and sister, but he was unable to kill his father, Victor Creel. Dr. Brenner and Hawkins Lab falsified Henry's record and made him deceased. Then they pinned the eyeball murders on Victor Creel, and this would close the gap. Somewhere down the line, Brenner failed at controlling Number 1, so Brenner inserted an implant in Number 1's neck that would suppress his powers. An implant that we all know by now as Soteria. Number 1 would then be forced to work at Hawkins and tend to the other test subjects as Brenner began recruiting more children. We can learn a lot about Dr. Brenner by looking at the story of Terry Ives, a woman who participated in the MK Ultra experiments that were hosted by Brenner at Hawkins Lab. Terry over here had no idea she was pregnant during the time she went through these experiments. And in 1971, Terry ended up giving birth to Jane Ives, who was born with psychokinetic abilities. So Hawkins took her, added her to the other test subjects, and renamed her Number 11. Terry was going through a lot, but she briefly witnessed Jane being all alive and breathing and stuff, so she was pretty suspicious when they told her she had a miscarriage. In fact, she didn't believe them at all. She even recognized Dr. Brenner, who was in the hospital room during Eleven's birth. Brenner was in there snatching children because at this point he was aware that any child whose parents participated in the CIA-conducted experiments had a chance of having these abilities. So what happened to 11 is what must have happened to every other test subject at the facility. They all must have been taken from their parents at birth, erasing any record of them from the hospital, then paying off everyone to confirm that there was a miscarriage or something similar happening. Brenner must have started taking children at birth when Number 1 became really disobedient, and other subjects like Number 8 escaped, both being kids who were older when he brought them into Hawkins. And because of this, Brenner changed up his strategy of training his test subjects. He found it was easier to indoctrinate the test subjects if he made himself the father figure. He even used the strategy on other employees at Hawkins. Back in season 1, Brenner referred to Shepard as his son.
Good luck in there, son.
And Shepard was clearly motivated to step into the death-bringing dimension because of Brenner. By 1979, Brenner was having all the test subjects refer to him as Papa.
Are you ready?
Yes, Papa!
Good.
while he refers to them as son or daughter, but mostly by their number. Some people think that Papa Brenner is the actual father of Eleven, which is a good theory, but there's sadly no evidence to support that other than this photograph of Terry and him together, the fact that we never met Eleven's father or heard about him, the fact that Brenner was there the day of Eleven's birth, and the fact that Terry was a participant in the MKUltra studies at Hawkins, where she spent a lot of time with Dr. Brenner. Oh, wait, there is also the fact that Brenner is incredibly creepy, unethical, and a bunch of similar adjectives. So I'd say it's definitely a possibility. Okay, after talking about it for a second, I'm kind of believing that he is Eleven's biological father. Terry and other MKUltra participants decided to go after Brenner and Hawkins, but the district attorney was paid off like the other staff of the hospital because the DA declined to press criminal charges citing lack of evidence. And I'm over here like, really? The DA couldn't press any criminal charges because of lack of evidence? Really? Really? Even though in this other article, it's mentioned that there's over 1,700 documents that have been released containing significant details of the extent of the drug tests, including details of death from the experiments. I think those documents are a pretty good start to pressing those charges, but then again, I digest. Anyway, the DA was useless, so Terry pursued legal action herself and filed a lawsuit against Dr. Brenner and the Hawkins facility. But all of her attempts to take down Hawkins were futile, leaving Terry with no other choice but to take action into her own hands. She broke into Hawkins, shot a security guard, and got to see Jane for like a second before getting taken away. This is when Dr. Brenner gave her electroshock therapy, which pretty much toasted her brain. So after that day, Terry was no longer an issue to Dr. Brenner. Brenner continued his research uninterrupted until he was interrupted by Number One. Specifically, on September 8th, 1979, Number One tricked Eleven into removing what appears to be an easily removable chip called Soteria, the chip that prevented Number One from using his powers. After she did that, Number One went to town on the Rainbow Room and killed all the test subjects and staff members on that floor. Upon her discovery of Number One's destruction, Elle angrily banishes Number One to another dimension that we now know as the Upside Down. After this really weird day, Eleven was the only subject left at the facility, making her the most precious asset to Dr. Brenner. This is when Brenner began taking Eleven under his wing and giving her one-on-one training. Elle went from crushing product placement to then crushing cats, but refused to crush cats because cats. She then advanced to moving humans as she killed 2 Hawkins employees that were putting her in solitary confinement. Speaking of which, I just want to express my frustration with one thing that I know no one's gonna care about: the tiles. Can we talk about the freaking tiles on the wall? During this scene in season 1, when Elle slams the employee into the wall, they actually broke the tiles on the wall and left a real hole. Then in season 4, when Number One is slamming other employees up against the same kind of wall, they are clearly using CGI to create the destroyed tile effect, and it looks cheap in comparison to season 1. I know there's bigger issues in the world, but I will die on this hill. They need to bring back walls at Hawkins Lab actually getting destroyed, and not this CGI that looks like they just put a sticker up there. Okay, don't worry, the rant's over, we're moving on. After Eleven exercised her ability to kill, Brenner had her find people by just using a picture of their face. We were initially led to believe that the main intent of this exercise was to spy on the Russians, but during season 4 it's implied that Brenner had Eleven make contact with the Demogorgon because he was looking for Number One. In season 4, Number One / Vecna tells Eleven that he was waiting for someone to open a gate. When Elle made contact with the Demogorgon, who was under Vecna's control, it's implied that Vecna / the Mind Flayer / Number One / Henry Creel formed a connection with Eleven that was powerful enough to open a gate at Hawkins. Vecna began his takeover by releasing a single Demogorgon into the town. Before Eleven saved the day by banishing this Demogorgon back to the Upside Down, Brenner was tackled by the monster. This would be the last time we saw him till 1986. He survived the attack, but couldn't survive getting fired from Hawkins Lab. Back sometime in the mid-70s, Terry Ives broke into Hawkins, and she came across Jane in the Rainbow Room. This Rainbow Room would later be expanded to the one that we see in 1979. The Rainbow Room is sort of this common area that's full of fun games and activities to help challenge and exercise the children's abilities. But when the Rainbow Room was smaller and more depressing, Eleven occupied the room with another child, that child being named Kali Prasad, or Number 8. Like Number One, Kali wasn't taken at birth. She was taken when she was older, and she was also taken from London. And I think this is a really good time to address the question that I know is on a lot of people's minds: where the heck is number 8? In order to thoroughly answer that question, we got to go back to the beginning, starting with number 8's origin from season 2, episode 7, The Lost Sister. It's a shame that the episode wasn't season 2, episode 8, but once again, I digest. This was also known as the most divisive episode of Stranger Things. We see here that all the episodes of Stranger Things are pretty well liked, and then all the way at the bottom, right down here, we can find The Lost Sister with a rating of 6.1. In a 2017 interview with Entertainment Weekly, one of the creators of Stranger Things, Matt Duffer, talked about how they knew the risk of creating an episode like The Lost Sister, claiming whether it works for people or not, it allows us to experiment a little bit. It's important for Ross and I to try stuff and not feel like we're doing the same thing over and over again. It's almost like doing a whole little other pilot episode in the middle of your season, which is kind of a crazy thing to do, but it was really fun to write and cast and work on. And for the fans, I feel like that's where a lot of the frustration came from, was how it did feel like a pilot in the middle of the season. Because at the time, like circa 2017, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was taking off, and all the studios were wanting to start capitalizing on this whole expanded universe thing, even though a lot of them were failing miserably at it. This made it so that The Lost Sister came across as something that halted the natural flow of the story to follow this trend of seeing how many spin-offs they can get from this hyped up property. But the Duffer Brothers want to even further attempt this, as a lot of their audience hated this episode, and well, 6.1. Mind you, I like the episode, but I will admit that the writing and direction made it come across as cartoon-like and cheesy in comparison to the rest of the series. Tonally, it was kind of an odd episode for Stranger Things. In the same interview that I was just talking about like a second ago, the other creator of Stranger Things, Ross Duffer, went on to add that Eleven's storyline overall is sort of the biggest risk that they took, and that they're still going to take risks going forward to keep them on their toes. He didn't want Eleven to just magically save the day. Just like Luke Skywalker, she needed to go off on her own and learn something about herself. I feel like this 6.1 episode really deterred the Duffer Brothers from further pursuing 8's storyline, and it's most likely why we haven't heard from her in 2 seasons. I couldn't tell you whether or not 8's coming back for season 5. It seems that 8 being one of the last test subjects who's alive from Brenner's program would make her more essential to the story. Number 1, mentioning 8 when he was reminding 11 about that one memory with her mother kinda gives me hope that 8 will return. Frankly, it's shocking that she didn't come back already, because she is actively going after people who were associated with Hawkins. I don't know. To be fair, it's hard to say how much of the series the Duffer Brothers planned out ahead of time, because there's moments like back in season 1 when Mike starts explaining to 11 that he was tripped by alleged mouth breather Troy and getting bullied, to which 11 responds, "I understand."
I don't know why I just didn't tell you. Everyone at school knows. I just didn't want you to think I was just such a wasteoid, you know?
Mike,
Yeah?
I understand.
A possible nod to how she was an outcast amongst her peers and was bullied at Hawkins' lab, something that wasn't even revealed until season 4, volume 1. Anyway, number 8 escaped Hawkins sometime after she was separated from 11. Why 11 was moved to the larger Rainbow Room, yet 8 stayed in the same location, could have been due to the fact that 8 was more rebellious, as she did end up escaping. When we ran into 8 in the year 1984, it kind of seemed like 8 lost her way, as she clearly was revenge-driven. 8 and her friends tracked down former employees from Hawkins' lab. Employees that either left Hawkins before the massacre of 1979 or were removed when Dr. Sam Owens and new management came in to replace them. Like Ray, who was responsible for performing electroshock therapy on Terry Ives. During the attempted murder of Ray, he spilled the beans to 11 that Dr. Brenner was alive, and that he survived the Demogorgon attack in 1983. Ray ended up being right, but we had to wait till 1986 to see him. Dr. Brenner is alive thanks to his one superpower, which is getting knocked to the floor and surviving events that logically he wasn't supposed to survive. When number 8 was trying to get 11 to better use her powers, she had to reflect on something from her past that made her angry. The same kind of lesson that number 1 gave 11 back at Hawkins. By the fall of 1984, Dr. Sam Owens replaced Brenner as the senior research scientist and director of Hawkins National Laboratory. It appeared that a fair amount of the staff was replaced as well. The staff would go on to be scattered across the country and be hunted by number 8. and friends. Dr. Owens is a slightly more ethical scientist than Dr. Brenner. Like how Will was possessed by Vecna / the Mind Flayer, and Owens was against burning the gate to the Upside Down, thinking that it would kill him, even though all the other scientists were pressuring him into continuing the burn. But like I said, Sam Owens was slightly more ethical, because Hawkins Lab continued its reputation of spying on the citizens of Hawkins with an entire division of employees dedicated to monitoring everyone's phone calls. They also continued their reputation of not informing anyone about the deadly threats that put all the citizens of Hawkins in danger. Dr. Sam Owens and new friends were put in the position of the cleanup crew. Will was still suffering from the connection he had to Vecna / the Mind Flayer, and the gate that 11 opened up in 1983 was still growing and expanding into Hawkins. During this time, Vecna unleashed a different kind of Demogorgon into Hawkins that we cool cats called Demodogs. Because look at them, they're like Demogorgons, but they're also like dogs. They're so cute! Anyway, these puppies are responsible for Hawkins Lab Massacre 2.0. By November 4th, 1984, almost a year after 11 initially opened the gate grew big enough to allow the Demodogs into Hawkins, resulting in the deaths of a bunch of staff, and of course, Bob Newby, superhero. Rest in peace, Bob, or in your case, pieces. But luckily for Dr. Owens and the rest of Hawkins, 8 taught 11 how to better use her powers. Upon 11's return to Hawkins, Jim Hopper led her down to the gate. This is where Elle put the Mind Flayer / Vecna in his place and closed the out of the gate. Nancy Wheeler and Jonathan Byers intentionally got caught by the CIA or other agents working for Hawkins, doing this so they could be brought back to Hawkins Lab in order to record Dr. Owens admitting that Hawkins was responsible for the death of innocent people like Barbara Holland. Miss Wheeler and Mr. Byers collaborated with Murray Bauman, watering down the story and making it more tolerable for the public, then making copies of that confession and sending the watered-down story to every major news outlet surrounding them, like the Chicago Sun-Times. The news story gained national recognition, and under pressure of the public, Hawkins was shut down indefinitely in the year 1984. In 1985, Vecna, also known as Dr. Brenner's first test subject, was able to use the meat of animals and humans to create something that resembles the Mind Flayer, the same kind of way he uses the Upside Down particles to make the Mind Flayer within the Upside Down. During this time, a battle between Vecna and 11 occurred at the Starcourt Mall. Long story short, the Russians under the mall who were opening a gate to the Upside Down were stopped, and Vecna was also denied. After this encounter, 11 lost her powers. Or sorry, scratch that. She didn't lose her powers, she just forgot how to channel them. This brings us to the year 1986, a time where Dr. Brenner and Dr. Owens needed a weapon to fight Number One. Number One removed the eyeballs of his mother and sister, as well as the rest of his victims at Hawkins. And after finding 3 victims in Hawkins with their eyeballs removed, Brenner and Owens knew that Henry was back. So both Dr. Brenner and Dr. Owens created Project Nina, a name inspired by Nicholas de Lirac's opera, Nina, a story about trying to get someone to remember the truth of their past, using a combination of drugs, Brenner's recordings of everything that happened at Hawkins, and the ultimate sensory deprivation tank. They are able to make 11 relive her past trauma that her mind was suppressing. Doing this so 11 can remember how to use her abilities, so she can become strong enough to fight Vecna because he's, returned. Well, to be fair, he's always been there. For Project Nina, Dr. Owens caved to Dr. Brenner's methods as they basically imprisoned 11 again. Owens said that 11 had a choice, but that was clearly a lie because every time Elle tried to leave, she was the definition of stopped. Oh, and speaking of Dr. Brenner, can we just take a second to talk about Dr. Brenner and his relationship with 11? I'm also going to take this time to psychoanalyze the ever-living heck out of Dr. Brenner, starting with the fact that Brenner is a compulsive liar. Most of the time, I think that Brenner is so overly ambitious and caught up in his own agenda that he fools himself into believing his own lies. But he mainly just lies to control and manipulate people like 11 and Dr. Owens. Like how he tells 11 that she has a choice in leaving Project Nina, even though when she tries to leave, the guards are like, nah. After all this time, Brenner still stands by his lie that 11's mother was sick and she was a danger to everyone around her, even though the only reason Terry acted the way she did was because Brenner took her child as well as turned the entire legal system against her. Oh yeah, there's also that one lie where 11 was growing up and Brenner told her that her mother was dead, even though Terry wasn't dead. She was just vibing over here the entire time. Brenner also claimed that Number One didn't exist, but Number One was also vibing over here. In the year 1979, Vecna taught 11 Eleven that using a memory from her past that made her sad or angry will better help her channel her powers. However, at the time, Dr. Brenner advised his students that if they allow anger or emotion to invade their thoughts, they will fail. Clearly two different approaches to utilizing their psychic abilities. During that day, Eleven won the circle game by shoving number 2 out of his circle. Brenner suspected that his previous failure over here taught Eleven how to use anger and emotion. So Brenner was more worried than impressed because he didn't want a repeat of number 1. Brenner wanted his test subjects to rely on a more stable, less emotional way to channel their powers, which is why later that day Brenner decided to punish number 1 to prevent him from further influencing Eleven. Brenner just wanted everyone to handle things in a less unstable way, because emotion and fear actually ended up compromising Eleven during Project Nina, to the point where Eleven was regressing. But when creating Project Nina, Brenner realized that Eleven could only reach her full potential by using and mastering those angry or sad memories. At Hawkins, when Eleven got hurt by her bullies, Brenner was reinforcing the rules and punishing number 2 because he couldn't have chaos. Brenner prioritized order and discipline, so when number 1 told Eleven that Brenner was going to allow the other test subjects to kill her, and that he's been planning it for a bit now, I believe number 1 was lying. Brenner was only focused on controlling his test subjects, not pitting them against each other. I don't trust Brenner, but I think Brenner was telling the truth when he said that he loved Eleven and all the others. Dr. Brenner's first test subject would eventually lead to his downfall. The government believed that Eleven was responsible for Vecna's murders, which is why Lieutenant Colonel Jack Sullivan, the US Army, and the government wanted Eleven dead. Papa Brenner takes a few rounds and 1 fatal wound to the chest. This is what would eventually kill him. Before his death, he witnesses Eleven take down a chopper in the most epic way possible. This made Brenner realize that Eleven was ready to take on Vecna, which is why he deactivated her collar and set her free. Then Brenner tells Eleven that he needs her to know that he only ever wanted to help her, to protect her, and that everything he did for her. And there's some truth to Brenner's final words to Eleven. I believe he did want to protect her. Like I said, back in 1979, number 1 was most likely lying when he said that Dr. Brenner was planning on having Eleven killed. But what about when he says that he only wanted to help her, and that everything he did for her? This is where it gets interesting, because Brenner was working his way through the kids to find someone as powerful as number 1, but someone that he could also control. He was just drawn to whatever test subject had that potential. So it's no coincidence that they had him prioritize training number 10 before the September 8th massacre. It's to inform us, the audience, that he's just moving down the line of test subjects and no one is particularly his favorite. Brenner later saw Eleven as his only hope because he had no other options left. All of the test subjects that he acquired through the years either died or escaped. You could say that he was kind of just stuck with Eleven. But when viewing the recording of Eleven fighting Vecna and during his work with her, that's when Brenner saw her potential. Throughout the years, Brenner only wanted to control Eleven and everyone else because he was purely motivated to see his test subjects thrive and reach their full potential. So even though Eleven wasn't Dr. Brenner's first choice, his perspective on the project at Hawkins' lab changed over time. He later viewed it as something that was leading up to Eleven. So from Brenner's perspective, there's truth behind him saying that everything he did for her. But I mean, he did end up taking everything from Eleven, her mother, her childhood, and a chance at a normal life. Eleven was Brenner's prisoner, so Eleven saying bye and just piecing out of there is her finally being free of the hold that Papa Brenner had over her. She doesn't give Brenner the satisfaction by telling him that she understands, because she doesn't want to justify his actions. So in 1986, Brenner died alone and unredeemed in the middle of the Nevada desert. Guys, I'm not kidding. I've been working on this video from the moment that I released that one Mind Flayer Explained video. So I do plan on making more Stranger Things videos if you guys want them, but it's gonna take some time because I want to give you quality and I want to give you something that's going to change your perspective on the show or have you learn something new. Anyway, that was my quick comprehensive guide to Dr. Brenner and Hawkins' lab. Thanks for watching.